Apparently, this course is not only an introduction to the phenomenological approach, but also into the hermeneutic approach. Phenomenology and hermeneutics belong together. Already in Being and Time, Heidegger depicted his phenomenology of Dasein as a hermeneutics of everyday existence, an explication of some of its features and structures. Being and Time does not offer an exhaustive, fully comprehensive system of the world and of our being in the world. It offers a selection of some, according to Heidegger, crucial existential structures that may inspire us to work with. So there's nothing wrong with Ernst Bloch calling Being and Time an ontology of anxiety, eine Angstontologie, and placing a philosophy of hope vis-à-vis Being and Time. And we must applaud Hannah Arendt and Ludwig Binswanger for writing a phenomenology of love next to Being and Time. Welcome in the hermeneutic universe. There is no encompassing theory of the world. We must embrace our situatedness and temporality. Perhaps, I would say they are. Phenomenology and hermeneutic are a more positive, more affirmative articulation of what we still somewhat embarrassingly call postmodernism. Phenomenology and hermeneutics turn an embarrassment into an occasion and an invitation. In Dutch, van een verlegenheid een gelegenheid maken. They don't make philosophy easier. Perhaps metaphysics, in spite of its complexity, and modernity, in spite of its huge task, enlightenment, science, and perpetual progress, are easy ways out. Phenomenology is not easy. It is, alluding to the wonderful title of a wonderful book by Donna Haraway, a way of staying with the trouble of temporal existence. And when Gadamer argues that we now realize that we live in a hermeneutic universe, an everlasting dialogue, which Nietzsche had already depicted as there are only interpretations of interpretations of interpretations, that is perspectivism, a fierce but fruitful debate occurred with, amongst others, Habermas and Derrida. The first stressing that power structures often dictate and often hinder our dialogues. The latter, Derrida, telling us, even questioning, whether true dialogue is even possible. There is no fusion of horizons possible, according to Derrida. Only a disruption and a dispersion of horizons. All our conversations are wind-swept. Meaning is not something that is easily to be attained. Next to reading all the books that I'm going to advise you for Christmas, you may also listen to a nice recording of a band with a wonderful title, Talking Heads, who wrote a wonderful album, Stop Making Sense. I think this goes against everything that philosophy seems to be about, something that philosophy should also think about. Aren't we constantly and convulsingly trying to make sense of the words? Stop making sense. But here's a man always almost retiring speaking. Yeah. There is an often quoted old Chinese expression, although it's much debated whether it's really of Chinese origin, which says, "May you live in interesting times." In fact, the expression means, may you live, it's more a curse than a wish, may you live in difficult, harsh, and demanding times. We indeed live in interesting times, and phenomenology and hermeneutics are ways of facing and enduring these interesting times, seeking for Inter-essa. But perhaps, and that's what this class is all about, that is not enough. So let's take it up a notch and look at the works of Emmanuel Levinas.
Hello and welcome back to First Philosophy. I'm Sonia Schwetz.
I'm Kas Molenaar.
And I'm celebrating today because...
You're finally able to celebrate.
Exactly, because we're finally getting to my special interest.
Your guy.
Exactly, the guy in my corner. I say we've had enough Heidegger for some time, and today we're finally talking about Emmanuel Levinas, who I did mention already multiple times throughout these episodes.
Yeah. Tell us about it. Like, give the listener who's unfamiliar with Levinas, before Awee delves into it, the first...
You want me to give the spoilers?
Slightly. No, but maybe what to focus on. What really grabbed your attention?
Yeah, why is it special for you?
It's very special to me because, and I think this is something that Awee urges you to take as the central point of this lecture. Levinas's writing is beautiful in many ways, but what we're focusing on, I think, this time around is on his idea of primacy of ethics over ontology. And that rang extremely true. And I think there was also just extremely fertile soil for me for it to ring true, because as Awee will mention, Levinas was born in Lithuania and his childhood was spent there. It was pre 1917 revolution, and but it was a part of a Russian empire, and so he was raised on a lot of Russian literature that I gulped as well. The most notable being, for both of us, as will also be discussed, Dostoevsky. And so obviously he got really, really influenced in the same way, or in a comparable way, that I also got influenced during my teenage years. And then Levinas grew up and wrote all this stuff that was influenced by this shared obsession of ours. And of course it's going to ring a bell within me. Because these are the same intuitions that I've developed, and the same preoccupations that I've developed. So I think it was just very easy for me to like it and to feel like it is something true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's very nice to hear that enthusiasm.
Thank you. Yeah, because I've been so unenthusiastic all the time we talked about Heidegger.
No, but like it is such. Talking about Levinas with you also made me read more Levinas.
Yeah,
because it is nice to be. I think it's contingent.
Yeah, it's being in Levinas.
Contagious.
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 Yeah.
It's the same when we listen to you about Heidegger. There's a spark in your voice, right? And that comes across, and that's always nice to hear. And I think that's also part of this podcast.
That's true. And I mean, Kas, in fact, influenced so much that we're reading Being in Time 10 pages at a time.
Yeah,
every week. So it's
I make up with it by cooking dinner beforehand.
That's true. Yeah. But
anyway,
actually, before we go to Levinas, there's this word that Awee used.
For the listener, keep a pin in primacy
of
ethics over ontology.
Yes.
Okay. There's a word Awee mentions.
Yes, a difficult word.
A difficult word. Or at least a word that you should be attuned to by now. Or we like to repeat the emphasis on this word. It's Inter-essa. So the word Inter-essa, both the German and the Dutch for interest. But it should be taken as between inter and being essa, like between being. Is a different way of positioning yourself and moving yourself towards a certain topic or a certain thing, instead of a sort of distanced interest, having an interest in something. It's like positioning yourself in the middle of this.
Yeah, being enmeshed.
Being enmeshed, yeah. So that's when Awee mentions we indeed live in interesting times. That phenomenology and hermeneutics are ways of phasing and enduring these interesting times, seeking for inter-essa.
Yeah.
That is really like trying to position yourself between yourself and these interesting things happening.
Yeah.
I think that's it's also a very good first primer for this lecture.
Ah, interesting. You're connecting it all. But yeah, and I mean, of course, we could also hear just how together Awee is positioning phenomenology and hermeneutics.
Yeah.
And I think it's yet another reminder that these are not strict methodologies, but ways of seeing or ways of approaching. Because if it was methodologies, you would be saying it's two conflicting things that go together, which is, of course, wouldn't make any sense. So when you're thinking yourself, I think it's also good to know that you don't have to be rigidly stuck in one way of approaching a thing. Make it floaty and interchange and combine phenomenology and hermeneutics if you want, or something different.
Yeah.
But it is also true that phenomenology and hermeneutics are kind of bundled together in this way by quite many people, but not all. It's not necessarily...
No, there are definitely people like only working with Merleau-Ponty, for example. And Merleau-Ponty himself does do both, but there are people like very strictly working with bodily schemas and then really thoroughly working that out. It is a way of practicing phenomenology, but this way, I think we both prefer.
Yeah, it's fun.
It is, it is.
And with that, I think we've said everything there is to say before we finally go into Levinas.
Yeah, I think the listeners should sit back and enjoy.
Yeah.
Levinas gives voice to a provocative position. He develops a radical critique not only of phenomenology and hermeneutics, he also directs a full-fledged critique towards the entire tradition of Western philosophy and culture. So again, brace yourselves. Levinas offers, first, a critique of phenomenology through phenomenology. Levinas studied the works of Husserl and Heidegger in the 1920s and 30s when he was in Berlin, and he was actually one of the first who really contributed to introducing phenomenology and the philosophy of existence in France. His book, En découvrant l'existence avec Husserl et Heidegger, so discovering existence with Husserl and Heidegger, is a wonderful tribute to what they are doing. But later on, especially contemplating on the atrocities of the Second World War, Levinas fervently distanced himself from phenomenology and most particularly from Heidegger. What does this mean? A critique of phenomenology through phenomenology. Phenomenology aims at describing what shows itself from itself. I quote from the summary of the first class: phenomenology means to let what shows itself be seen from itself just as it shows itself from itself. According to Levinas, however, there is a phenomenon which resists all description, a phenomenon which is more than a phenomenon, a phenomenon which cannot be reduced to or encapsulated by our descriptions and our interpretations. So it is a being beyond being, to play with Heideggerian idiom. There is a being beyond being, and that is the other, or the face of the other. Now, we must make sure that the face of the other should not be taken literally as something that can be recognized or described. It's all about the encounter with the other as other. That's what the face of the other means to Levinas. It is an overwhelming and humbling experience of a abyssal vulnerability. The face of the other is an abyssal vulnerability, and at the same time an invocation, an appeal to my responsibility, not to someone, and it's even a responsibility beyond my understanding, beyond all my capacities of description and interpretation. Hermeneutically speaking, or more accurate, as a critique of hermeneutics, the face of the other is a gap in my horizon. This is what being in the world to Heidegger already is, and what Gadamer has further elaborated on. There's always, in my being in the world as a student, as a teacher, in all the roles I play or all the positions I have, a horizon against which I see the world. The other is a gap in my horizon. It cannot be interpreted. It cannot be reduced to meaning. Stop making sense. Not even to benevolence, because benevolence is a gesture of mine. The other resists all intentionality. These are fierce, fierce exclamations. To put it even more pivotally, the face of the other, and Levinas stresses this again and again, is not an ontological, but an ethical experience. And now we have to start thinking against the tradition. The other, because ontology fails, according to Levinas, it falls short when it comes to thinking the other as other in an ethical way. The other is not my alter ego, as Husserl claimed. No matter how much I bracket myself and no matter how much I bracket the other, that is not the way to go, Levinas says. The other is not Mitsein, as Heidegger put it. And even in the authentic being towards the other, where I let the other be, that, according to Levinas, is not enough, still ontological. And of course also, come back to this, the relationship to the other is not reducing the other, as Sartre had it, reducing the other to an en soi, to something or someone who is only what I see or what I perceive in the other. The gaze, we've talked about this. So Levinas' full-fledged critique, not only of phenomenology and hermeneutics, but of Western philosophy as a whole and as such, is precisely this: the primacy of ethics in regard to ontology. Ontology in all its shapes, historical shapes and forms. This is a remarkable statement, because this implies a complete reversal and a revolutionary attack on 25 centuries of Western philosophy. We have seen such an attack earlier in Heidegger, who speaks about 25 centuries of the forgetfulness of being. And Merleau-Ponty showed us, in my idiom, there is such a thing as the forgetfulness of the body in Western philosophy. But these are still only corrections within ontology. You understand? You try to make ontology better, more encompassing. But there is also something like a forgetfulness of the other, and that is not an ontological. It is an ontological forgetfulness, but the issue is not that ontology can ever correct itself here. Now, we are used to consider ethics to be a discipline amongst others. Ethics, this stems from the old metaphysical traditions where you have metaphysics is the main discipline, and there's the sub-branches of ethics, which addresses the good, logic, which addresses the true, physics, which addresses beings, and later on aesthetics, which addresses beauty. So in this approach, and this is still traditional in our academy, ethics only covers a part of the world. It is distinguished from logic and physics and aesthetics, which deal with other phenomena. Now this approach of ethics, Levinas tries to completely break with. There's another issue that has to be addressed, that we are struggling with ethics today more than ever. Ethics is a very difficult discipline for us now. It used to be quite clear you had the 10 Commandments. And in Plato, the highest idea in the world of ideas is to agathon, the idea of the good. In Christian thinking, God is ens summum bonum. So the best, most good thing is God. Even in Kant, there is a thing like goodwill. The goodwill is that you don't consider other people as means to an end, but as a goal in themselves, een Zweck an sich. And this even is reflected in what we articulated after the Second World War in the Declaration of Human Rights. Some of us, many of us, still believe that that is a wonderful thing, that we have articulated the human rights. We must realize that from gender studies and multiculturalism, some critics have said, well, the Declaration of Human Rights is actually the declaration of the rights of the 33-year-old heterosexual white male. And I think there is a lot of truth in that. But the worst thing is that we, and you all know this now, that we have this migration problem all over the world, that we are starting to calculate with human rights. We can't afford human rights anymore. This is a very, very tragic, very saddening development, although I would not say that there's such a thing as human rights, but there's still the impetus of doing the right thing, of doing something with ethics. We don't know anymore. Ethics has become politics. There is one attempt, and we're still haunted by Nietzsche, who said ethics is invented by weak people. It's an invention of the slaves. Weak people, they do ethics because then if you tell the others that they're wrong and that they're going to end up in hell, maybe they will treat you better. We have a trouble with ethics. John Rawls did a great experiment. I'll join you for it. Here we are, all of us, and here there is a veil of ignorance. Let's just call it a curtain. There's a huge, thick curtain, and here we are, and we don't know where we will end up when we go past the curtain. We don't know. We don't know our gender. We don't know the color of our skin. We don't know our mental capacities. We don't know our physical capacities. We don't know what country we will end up in. So according to Rawls, this would be the best solution of all. Because, and I expect you will agree at least a little bit, that we would be very, very keen to make sure that even those who are worse off will still have a good life. Yeah? This is a great experiment, very popular, very impressive. Would anyone want, before I tell it, what would be a critique of this? What is the problem with Rawls? If there is a problem, you may all agree, and then I suggest, I'll pay. We buy a huge curtain and we start working. The first problem is that, and Nozick pointed this out, it's a bit nasty. He said, well, Nozick is an American. He says, no, I'll take a gamble. You know, I won't make sure that even the stupid and the invalids will really be taken care of. I'll just hope that I will belong to the upper class. That's a poor argument. The main problem is it puts a huge stress on our imagination. It puts a huge stress on our imagination, and furthermore, it is still a continuation of calculating thinking and of what I call ableism. I'll give you a small example of something that made a lot of impression on me. Some years ago, there was a letter in the New York Times written by Harriet McBride Johnson. Harriet McBride Johnson is a severely handicapped lawyer, and she wrote this letter after a debate that she had with Peter Singer. Now, Peter Singer is well known for the philosopher who reinstalled animal rights, so he's very popular in those circles, a very humane, nice guy. But he wrote a book, Rethinking Life and Death, in 1995. And in this book, he urges that when there are children, even before they're born or after they're born, who are so severely ill, and he lists a lot of handicaps, a whole list of handicaps. If a child has these handicaps, their lives will be so terrible, he says, that we should even consider to perform what he calls postnatal abortion. If you would be honest, infanticide, killing a newborn baby. And Harriet McBride Johnson suffices on that list. She should not have been born. And she started a movement which was called the Not Dead Yet movement. And she started a discussion with Peter Singer. And there's one moment in this discussion that I want to highlight, where Peter Singer tells her, imagine, dear Harriet, because he was nice, he tried to be nice to her, but he still wanted her dead. Well, not now, but she should have died. She should have died, really. Honestly. If the people, your caretakers, would take you're a little piece of meat that you call a body. He didn't put it that way, but that was what he was really saying. Put it on a beach, and there you are, sitting there on the beach. And you would see all the children running through the waves. Won't you agree with me that you're terribly worse off? Terribly and terribly worse off? And Harriet Wright Johnson answers, it was my beach too. It is my beach too. Who will decide what it is going to a beach? Whether it is running through the waves or just sitting there with a few small grains of sand between your fingertips. Why isn't that also being at a beach? Who can decide? Our imagination lacks. This is the problem with Rawls. He has this idea that this is worse off, that is worse off. So that is what we're all doing now in ethics. We're constantly calculating morally about abortion, about euthanasia. We're even calculating, this is the real depth of the end of philosophy. Kalis, quality of life. And there's years and so many years, and then you put a number on it, how much worth that life is to a person and whether our healthcare should provide for it. So we are really stuck in ontology. This is our problem. We notice it ourselves. We are stuck in ontology. Now, according to Levinas, ethics is not a philosophical discipline. Ethics is the fundamental way we are. We are truly ethical. So ethics is not something that I do when there's a moral issue, and then I go to the museum, and then I become aesthetical, and when I start calculating, I become a member of the squad of mathematicians. Ethics is our being as such. Western philosophy is stuck in ontology. Now, Plato and Aristotle, we already addressed this, have proclaimed that philosophy begins with wonder. And it is led by the desire to understand the world. Yeah? Gather knowledge, Aristotle says. Conquer the world through knowledge. Become a spectator mundi. Try to really understand the world. Now, Levinas says the fundamental disposition of true philosophy, of ethics, is not wonder, but disquiet, verontrusting. Disquiet. Now, some of you may think, I've heard this before. Who has challenged wonder with something that sounds like disquiet? Come on. Kierkegaard, very good. Kierkegaard said philosophy begins with concern to find a truth that I am willing to live and die for. That is the beginning of philosophy, not methodological doubt. That was the adversary of Kierkegaard. But Mark, for Kierkegaard, and now I speak on behalf of Levinas, I'm not a method actor, but I'm a method philosopher. Levinas would say, yeah, but that is a very, very egocentrical position. Finding a truth that you are willing to live and die for. Is that all there is? True disquiet, true concern is not about my own existence, but about the existence of others. True disquiet is the question, how can I do justice to others? Mind you, this is not a search for values, for new values. Then you would have neutral being and then building values on top of it. That's ontology, or the poverty of ontology, and ethics as a discipline. And after Max Weber, we are tempted to think this way. We live in a disenchanted world. Science is value-free. And when we leave the university, then we can have values and have our personal life with all our inclinations, values, and religions, and whatever we want to have. G.E. Moore, very notorious and famous analytic philosopher, has coined the idea of the naturalistic fallacy. He says there's an error in your thinking if you try to derive an ought from an is. So if you have a descriptive sentence, That's from a completely different, it has a completely different status than if you have a moralizing or an ethical sentence. These are two different discourses. So if I would say 10% of children in Rotterdam are very poor, that would be just a description. And it's a completely different thing if I would say it's an affront. It's a disgrace that 10% of children in Rotterdam are poor. I hope you understand. I have my good friend Fred Muller here in this class, but I don't believe in this fallacy. I think it's an existential fallacy. If I say 10% of the young people, young children in Rotterdam are poor, that is not a descriptive sentence. There is already more morality in it, even by exclaiming it. So we shouldn't go there, at least Levinas says. We should not go there, not saying that ethics is a separate way of looking at the world. But it's very important, Levinas does not try to develop an ethical theory in totality and infinity, his magnum opus, so not being in time, not being in nothingness, but totality, that's the world of ontology, and infinity, that's something that is beyond the other. He writes, it is of great importance not to be duped by morality, not to become a victim of moralities. We're not doing morality here. No morals, that's not the point. The whole thing is that we have to develop a critique of ontology as such. Being is a neutral thing, neutral. In French, you have the expression il y a, there is. Being is something neutral. It just is. It is the immediate indeterminable, as Hegel put it. But Levinas says there is a terrifying neutrality in being that we should be susceptible of. A terrible neutrality of this, just describing the world. We have to look at Levinas' personal background to understand this.
Okay, welcome back. We've had a lot of other philosophers mentioned as well, according, like amongst which are John Rawls and Peter Singer.
Yeah.
However, there is so much good things to say on Levinas that I think we should stick with him.
Yeah, it's very tempting to expand on.
Usually we would give a little bit more context, a little bit more background, but there is.
But I'm pulling the rug and I'm saying no, it's Levinas only actually. Yeah. And
which is very fair.
Thank you. We support women on this podcast and their Levinas obsession.
Yeah.
But I wanted to emphasize Awee's emphasis, if you will, of ethics for Levinas being not just something else to think about among thinking about a beautiful thing, thinking about a moral thing, right? That's he's saying. It's not about morality. The thing with Levinas is that ethics for him is fundamental in a sense that the primary experience is also a fraught word, of course, actually philosophically, but it's the primordial happening is the ethical happening. Being encountered with the other is the primordial happening, because for Levinas, it is encounter with the other that forms subjectivity. So it's foundational to one's subjectivity. That is, in this sense, it's first philosophy, right?
Yeah.
And encounter with the other is not an ontological experience, it's not epistemological, it's ethical experience. So it is in this sense that ethics is not just another thing. It is the first philosophy, the fundamental, foundational event happening. So indeed, when we talk about ethics within Levinas, it's very important, I think, for us all to keep in mind. We're not talking about trolley problems.
No.
It's completely fraught, uninteresting from his standpoint, completely irrelevant, whether you kill one person or 7. It's about ethics being the first thing, first philosophy. And it is in this sense, with the encounter with the others, this fundamental experience, that Levinas critiques phenomenology through phenomenology, because the encounter with the other, it is a phenomenal experience to some extent, but Levinas talks about how there is an overflowing that happens. It's simply too much. It's so outside of me that there's an overflowing of, let's say, meaning, for example. So there is something that so you cannot metabolize it, and therefore it ceases being phenomenal, right? So this thing that starts as a phenomenal experience, one can say, because of the nature of, because of what the other is, it leads to this overflowing, and therefore it ceases to be phenomenal. And that is when it's, at that point, this overflowing is the ethical. So that is kind of this structure, right, of this foundational experience.
Yeah.
And he goes even further than subjectivity. And there's this essay, Sense and Signification, I believe. It's in a bundle called Humanism of the Other, where he talks about, he posits that the world and language, I think, has lost. Yeah, the world and language have lost their univocality that would allow them to hold the criteria of what makes sense. And then Levinas is in search of what can give sense. And it's the other. He posits that the desire for the other, which is insurmountable because there's an eternal gap that separates us, but it is the desire to the other, it is that orientation towards the other that is capable of holding sense, because it's the one foundational universal kind of thing. So that is the ethics here. It's very like the turtle on whom the world rests kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's ethics all the way down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's ethics all the way down. That is also what is so important about understanding what Awee means when he says that ethics has become politics. I think that is because just like that, ethics is not just another thing to think about, or that you should, and I think that comes later, but that you should not replace like ontology with ethics. But like you should also not like what we now consider to be ethics is not this ethics. It's not what Levinas means with ethics. It's not, and you kind of indicated that with just saying like it's not a trolley problem.
Yeah.
It's also not like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative or like a balance sheet of utilitarianism. Yeah. To just name drop a few branches of ethics. Google them.
Yeah.
Or don't. And also that we can't afford human rights anymore. I think that's such a harrowing sentence.
I know.
And because it is so harrowing, you should stick with it.
Yeah. And it is because we keep doing trolley problems.
Yeah.
Like, at least somebody dies in a trolley problem all the time.
Yeah.
It's the solving. Of course, it ties to Heidegger. We have a problem and there's a solution, but now we're talking about people, so we're doing the trolley problem. But this is not ethics.
No.
It's making a decision.
I think this is a bit of a tangent, but in the sitcom The Good Place, there is a specific episode where they discuss trolley problems, but then instead of discussing them theoretically, like an entity makes them appear in these situations and I think, I mean, in this show it is put as a joke because it's a comedy show, but I think it actually makes a very good point, because as soon as someone is thrown into that situation, like the only thing you can do is panic.
Yeah.
And because these are people, you have to make choices about people.
Yeah.
It's like, because the trolley problem is like, well, there is a train running down the track. For those who don't know, like there's a train running down the track and 5 people are bound to it. You are at the lever. You can pull the lever and save these 5 people by diverting the train, but it will run into one person who's bound to a track. So do you let it happen? Do you do not have an action and let 5 people die? Or do you actively choose to make the decision to kill 1 person instead of 5?
Yeah.
Or is not choosing also a choice? All these possibilities. There is also the alternative to say, well, if you say you can use 1 life to save 5, can you murder a healthy person to give 5 people who need a healthy organ their transplant in a hospital? And like all these what ifs, all these hypotheticals, and in this episode of the show, they're just being thrown out there like in a hospital, and someone has to make the decision with the family members also asking, so hey, is my father going to live? And suddenly it becomes real.
Yeah, they're in the real trolley as well.
Yes.
No.
And it's funny, but it's also kind of a better ethics than the original issue, because the guy's confounded of what he needs to do. And then, as you say, we are in trolley problems all the time, and therefore it's far more realistic in a certain sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, that is the thing of Levinas. Once you are in this thing, like, would you kill one person to save 5? And then you have to deliver the news to the people. This is what Levinas is talking about. We can talk about this however long we want, but when you're there, you are faced with the other. As Awee says, you're looking at the face of the other.
Yeah.
There is no, I mean, it is an impossible situation.
Yeah.
It ceases being this moral calculation because that is inherently not, Levinas states, what happens when you are faced with the other, when you see the other as the other, because he also has this, we tend to sometimes, in certain circumstances, whatever, see others, treat them as objects, but once you don't do it, when you actually encounter the other, I mean, it is impossible. And that in that case, in this case that I provided, is a little bit literal, right? This face of the other.
Yeah.
However, as Awee warns, it is, dear listener, very important take this too literally.
It is so nice that you're so enthusiastic about it that you're not letting me do any of the scenes, any of the bridges. You're just trolleying full ahead.
I'm sorry.
No. I'm genuinely enjoying it. It's the enthusiasm is real, is tangible. It's really nice.
No, but because it's also such a stupid thing that I want to share.
No, it isn't.
I'm sorry.
Isn't. It's such a good thing.
Well, no, the anecdote is
okay.
extremely stupid.
Yeah.
Which is, you might be, you naive listener, no, you're not naive, I'm sorry, but you listener who was not looking up Levinas on Twitter in 2020 COVID lockdown might not have known this, but I do, because I did do that. Whatever, Levinas, I was like, what are people discussing him? What do they think? And well, it was mask mandates, just dropped that period of time, and people who I wouldn't call good faith actors,
no,
I would not call them good faith actors, were trying to use philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas and the importance of the face of the other to make an anti-masking argument, because they say, well, you can't see the face. And here you have it, the example of interpreting it extremely literally that completely misses the point.
Yeah. The face of the other should not be taken literally.
Yes.
We've also been very theoretical. It is a heavy episode, but I think at the end of the episode, everything that should be clear will be clear. But beginning with Levinas is a heavy experience. There are a lot of things to get attuned to, but all of it is very worthwhile.
Yeah.
So for now, also, I think part of his life really, really shaped his philosophy, and this is what we're going to talk about for the coming few minutes, or Awee is going to talk about for a couple of minutes. So I don't think enjoy is the correct word to use in this context.
Well, listen and let it enrich you.
Yeah.
Levinas was Jewish. He was born and raised in Lithuania, and in 1923 he moved to Strasbourg and became a French national. In 1939 he joined the French army, and soon after capitulation he became a prisoner of war. You might say that his uniform saved his life, because his entire Jewish family in Lithuania was massacred by the Nazis during the war. During his captivity, Levinas wrote a book called De l'existence à l'existant, published in 1947, which translates into From Being to Beings. So it's a direct attack on Heidegger. From being, so from the encompassing neutral phenomena of being, to the singularity of beings, ignored and ravaged by the Nazis. Primo Levi wrote a wonderful testimony of his time in Auschwitz entitled, If This Is a Man, wonderful title in Dutch. Is dit een mens? But without a question mark. It's just this terrible, well, I can't even find the words for it, epoch in human history where such disdain and such complete indifference, neutrality, has been shown towards individual human beings. Now Heidegger, Levinas says, talks about being as unconcealment, wonderful. And also in his later works he speaks of being as that which sends itself in different destinings. You still remember that we are now living in the era of technology. And Heidegger even uses the expression, which is a normal German expression, es gibt das Sein. So being gives itself in many ways, es gibt das Sein. That sounds like something generous. And Levinas says, there was not much generosity of being in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Now, Levinas not only attacks Heidegger's philosophy, but more than 20 centuries of Western philosophy and even Christian religion. And he claims that neither of them has been able to prevent the Holocaust to occur. Even worse, they could be considered to be a massive preparation of these atrocities. That is quite an accusation. Now let's look at one of the oldest maxims of Western philosophy, Heraclitus, who says, war, polemos, is the father of all things. It's one of the oldest phrases in Western philosophy. War is the father of all things. And Levinas he asks himself, how can that be? Why is that one of the most, this is significant that Western culture has such proverbs at its very beginning, marking its development from the start. Francis Bacon, founding father of modern science, says, we must put nature on the rack, the pijnbank, in order to force it to reveal all its secrets. In the first class, I told you that Western philosophy could be considered as a movement from chaos, mythos, to cosmos, order, and to logos, concepts, knowledge, reason, science. And I also quoted Rosenzweig, who said, philosophy always alleviates. Again and again, it tries to lift us over the abyss that gapes before our feet at every step we take. According to Levinas, Western philosophy is indeed a perpetual denying of chaos and a comforting attempt to escape chaos through reasoning. Logos is a refuge. Face chaos, Levinas tells us. Face the disquiet. Reason is not the answer, nor ontology, only ethics is. Now, how can we acknowledge ethics, true humanity beyond ontology? I will be brief in addressing the primary text. Is ontology fundamental? Levinas is very generous here about Heidegger. He says the primacy of ontology among the branches of knowledge would appear to rest on the clearest evidence. To question this fundamental evidence is a daring enterprise. Fundamental ontology, he says, even he calls it authentic ontology, where the facticity of temporal existence coincides with being, is a great novelty of contemporary ontology. He seems to be praising Heidegger. The whole man is ontology. His scientific work, his affective life, the satisfaction of his needs and his work, his social life and his death articulate with a rigor that assigns a determinate function for each of these aspects the understanding of being. Our entire civilization emanates from this understanding. It's all about disclosedness. That is impressive, he says. But there's something strange going on at an existential level. A comedy, he calls it a comedy. The comedy begins with our simplest gestures. Reaching out my hand to pull a chair towards me, I have folded the arm of my jacket, scratched the floor, dropped my cigarette ash. In doing what I will to do, and this is important, in doing what I will to do, I did 1,001 things I hadn't willed to do. The act was not pure. I left a trace. Then the comedy makes a tragic turn. We are responsible beyond our intentions. So with everything I do, there's a lot of things that I also do, and I would even say that I don't do, which are in a way part of the equation, part of this act, part of this. This seems a little close to what Sartre would also say. But ontology and phenomenology try to overlook this too much, he says, and especially when it comes to the other. To Heidegger, on page 3 on the bottom, being with the other rests on the ontological relation. We reply, Levinas says, is our relation with the other a letting be? Is not the independence of the other achieved through his or her role as one who is addressed? Is the person to whom we speak understood beforehand in his being? Not at all. The other is not first an object of understanding and then an interlocutor. The relation to the other is not ontology. And Levinas then, he starts using words that we would say, oh, I'm get lost. Because he says, I call the relation to the other religion. I call it metaphysics. I call it prayer. But he says, by doing so, I'm not uttering a word about God or anything. I'm not doing religion here. I'm just using words that I think are apt for this relationship. Metaphysics, religion, prayer. The face of the other I can never possess. The face signifies something that I can never understand. It is the infinite, the infinite resistance of a being to our power and our understanding. That is what he calls the nakedness of the face of the other. So not only with everything I do, there are 1,001 things that I didn't want to do. The true answer to chaos is acknowledging the shocking experience of the face of the other, which is a phenomenon beyond phenomenology and ontology. This is the ethical experience, and Levinas uses these words with a purpose, a metaphysical experience to show it is not part of our natural world, not part of ontology. It is, he even calls it an epiphany, a religion. It is something beyond my understanding. The face of the other, he even says, is a non-philosophical experience, never truly addressed in Western philosophy. Now let's try to make this a bit more tangible. Okay, this is what Levinas says. There's no knowledge, no interpretation, no acknowledgement in a reasonable way or the ethical way, a sense of the word that will really do justice to the other as other. Now let's look at some accomplishments of Western tradition that we might say, well, that here we are really trying to reach humanity. Here we're doing something wonderful. Faith, hope, and love, we might talk about 1 Corinthians 13, but I will talk about hope, forgiveness, and love. 3 things I hope you will agree. I trust you agree. Hope, forgiveness, and love. These are wonderful things. But first, hope. I'll be brief about this because Levinas has a point here. Hope is often a corrupting project. Hope is always reducing the world to the economy of my desires, my expectations, my needs and wants, and it's aimed at my personal well-being or the personal well-being of those that I love. That is the problem. There's something troublesome in hope. To really hope for others that I don't even know is something that is very difficult to do. Now let's take forgiveness. And Levinas has a terrible, nasty definition of forgiveness. He says, forgiveness is creating an intimate community. An intimate community. I would say forgiveness is a wonderful thing. I'll give you an anecdote. Many years ago, I had a very bad mood. I was walking the streets near my house, and there's this guy living in the neighborhood. Oh, he's such a nuisance. He always comes to me, he wants to talk to me. I was so fed up with him. So I don't know why, but I beat the crap out of him. I don't know. I was in a terrible mood. I really, really bad. I was pounding blows upon him, and I thought I should stop. So I stopped and I walked away. 2 weeks later, I met him. He was still black and blue, covered in bandages. And I walked up to him and I said, Frank, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And he said, well, he couldn't talk very well. Well, I mean, deep down, you're a very good person. I forgive you. No. Wonderful. Wonderful situation. No, Levinas would say. Forgiveness is not something that can be intersubjectively solved. Forgiveness refers to an injustice that has been done. An injustice has been done, objectively. This is something that in Jewish thought is a very important thing. It's not up to us to say that, oh, there's an injustice that has been done, and now we can have make a gesture and we forgive this. And then this is a massive critique Levinas has on Christianity. The idea to be forgiven for all our sins. God will forgive. Levinas says, the possibility of endless forgiveness invites to commit endless evil. Now, that's a very strong point. The mere idea of endless forgiveness, the possibility of endless forgiveness invites us to commit endless crime. We have this strange idea about the development from Jewish philosophy, Judaism, to Christianity. We even talk about the Western culture as Judeo-Christian. Ernst Jung once wrote a wonderful book about, it's called Answer to Job. Job is one of the books, later books in the Old Testament where God and the devil, they start a wager, and the devil says, well, you know, I'll win. They're a bit bored. Everybody's very religious on earth, and they make a wager. The devil says, you pick out the most faithful person that you know, and I'll turn him against you. And God says, well, let's do it. It's a bit crude. Well, okay. Even the gods can be bored. And so Job is plagued with a terrible, all his cattle is killed, all his children are dead, his body is covered with terrible sores, and he turns against God and he argues with God, and God convinces him that God is really powerful, he's true power. So how can you argue with true power? Didn't I make the mountains? Do I not do everything? God tells Job, and Job agrees, and then he gets new children back, as if that would help, but that is a very petty way of thinking of me. He gets his cattle back, that's easier, and things work out. And now, there's this theory of Jung that there's a development from the Old Testament, Jewish thinking, to Christianity, where the God of power, the Almighty God, turns into a God of love. So there's a progression between Judaism and Christianity. And Levinas would disagree. He would say, exactly this example, the attention to an injustice that has been done and that cannot be overcome by people amongst themselves is of a fundamental importance. He even calls Judaism a religion for adults. He never called Christianity a religion for children. But if you say that we pray for God, oh, please give me this, please give me that, there is some childishness, and I'm talking about religion A. Judaism, he calls a religion of adults. But now to explain it even further, let's talk about love. Love is a wonderful thing. The language of love, imagine yourself being in a restaurant with someone you really love, sipping on a glass of Chateau n'existe pas, telling each other, you're everything to me. I couldn't live without you. We belong together. There's a wonderful poem by John Donne which says, our love makes one little room and everywhere. I like that. Our love makes one little room and everywhere. Now this is what Levinas says. To love means to exist as if lover and loved are alone on the world. The intersubjective relation of love is not the beginning, but the denial of community. This is in the summary. Yeah? Love is an égoïsme à deux, a dual selfishness. You can have an égoïsme à trois if you have a relationship with three, because that doesn't change the thing. Love is loving one creature at the expense of others, neglecting others. Love is blind to the other. The community of love is a closed community. To love means to exist as if lover and loved are alone on the world. The intersubjective relation of love is not the beginning, but the denial of community. Love is loving one creature at the expense of others, neglecting others. Love is blind to the other. Well, let's look at some mitigating circumstances. If you're in love, you become a nice person. You become kind. You buy flowers, you write poems, speak kind words. You even have like this basis that makes you a kind person. If you're in love, it may have happened to you. You're walking towards the university and you see some bicycles that fell on the ground and you set them straight. I don't know, you don't know why, you just set them straight. There's this old lady who's hesitating to cross the street. And you walk up to her and you help her cross the street. Of course you do. You're in love, you're happy. And then she breaks up with you. Damn the bicycles. You save yourself, you old bat. Everything's gone. Everything's gone. Love, and it is true what Levinas says, love installs a closed community. It excludes the other as a third. So this is very important to realize how Levinas is radically rethinking intersubjectivity. The other is the third, so the other is always not there. The other is not you. The other is not someone in particular. So the intersubjectivity in Husserl, that's nonsense. It never reaches the other as other. Heidegger's Mietsein, not at all. Sartre is interesting. Sartre's interesting. Now maybe with Sartre, we can understand Levinas better and overcome Sartre, if you believe what Levinas is telling you. Because Levinas says the relationship to the other has two possibilities, to the other as other. It's either murder or respect. With murder, he doesn't mean physical violence. Murder is exactly what Sartre describes. When you reduce the other to your perception of the other, you murder the other as a pour soi or as an other. So I think the word murder is, well, it's a bit dramatic, but it's good. It's good. We constantly murder, degrade the other. If we do, as long as we do this, as long as we only live with the perceptions of the other, we murder him. But there's also the possibility of respect. And in respect, and that's why the words religion come in, epiphany, Levinas even uses the word become a hostage of the other. Become a hostage of the other. Not because the other is stronger than me. It's not by force that he takes me hostage, but only and precisely because this is a face, a naked face, only of vulnerability, of no force, no strict personal appeal. It is just because there is no appeal directed to me from someone, this appeal, this invocation is overwhelming.
So there's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I heard a lot about the other, a lot about just how overwhelming this being called upon is. Yeah. And I think we both found quite interesting and insightful Awee's emphasis on what proverbs we as, well, Kas and I definitely at least, as adepts of quote unquote Western culture have, you know, and he of course, and we were discussing this proverb, and you mentioned something I didn't know before that I think is quite interesting.
The war is the father of all things proverb by Heraclitus is, I think, a very famous motto in a lot of philosophy. It's also taken very seriously. But what is so interesting about these mottos and about the things that they mean and the things that they carry is that in this specific case of Heraclitus, there is a recent retranslation by a Dutch translator of Heraclitus who's tried to categorize all the fragments that we have, because there's nothing concise by Heraclitus written that we still have. It's all fragments and people commenting on what he is supposed to have written. It's not even sure if it's one guy.
That's a classic situation.
There are a lot of interesting things to delve into. But who's really trying in his translation, making clear this proverb is taken for granted in philosophy, but it's not even necessarily the actual meaning. There are other ways to translate this, and if you look at it in the context of the other fragments that we believe belong to Heraclitus, it could carry a completely different meaning. And he's trying to give this other interpretation of Heraclitus, and that is so interesting, because what that changes is both a lot about a specific philosopher, but also absolutely nothing, because so many philosophers believe this to be true.
Yeah.
The same thing goes with cogito ergo sum by Descartes, for example. That is, because the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, constitutes the thinking being, and Descartes is supposed to be a rationalist and a dualist, and this is him grounding the thinking matter. And if you read other works by Descartes, you clearly see that he isn't this rationalist, dualist philosopher that separates body and mind. So these proverbs start carrying a certain meaning with it that are both very informative on the history of philosophy, of how we now understand it to be, but as well can also should never be understood as, this is what this philosopher meant actually.
Right.
This is maybe also reminding of the last Gadamer episodes.
Yeah.
Plato's not a Platonist. Maybe Heraclitus wasn't a Heraclitan.
Sometimes maybe the dominant interpretation tells you more about the time than it does about what that particular philosopher espoused.
Yeah.
But,
Sorry from keeping you.
Yeah, enough
away
about you,
from
Kas.
Yeah,
thank you. Because now I'm really having a field day.
Yeah.
Several things were mentioned that I was really listening to it, and I was like, wow, what a perfect platform for me to launch into drawing explicit parallels between Levinas and Dostoevsky. Isn't that a feast for the senses?
Yeah.
But just in case you were interested, Awee mentions a couple of things in the fragment that we just listened to. He of course mentions the story of Job, and I think Awee he mentions a little bit about it, but I think not in much detail. So basically, Satan and God dukes it out a little bit, and Satan was like, "Well, give me your most devoted believer, and just entrust him to me completely." Being like, well, and he will turn away from you. And God says, because of course in a traditional Christian reading is supposed to be that God is so confident and so good and whatnot. And so confident in his biggest believer, Job. He was like, okay, take Job. And so Satan takes everything from him, absolutely. And I think having sold or pawned some of his last possessions, it's just a whole family taken away. The story is that Job collapses on his knees, proclaims, God has given and God has taketh, right? And of course retains the belief. This story is incredibly, incredibly central to the whole thinking of Dostoevsky on religiosity, which is one of the absolute main themes. Biographically, we know that Dostoevsky, in childhood, when he had the big book, Bible, read the story, and we know that it was very impactful on him.
Yeah.
And it is a crazy story, because it has this thing of suffering inherent to happiness, and how one can't go without the other, which is, of course, it's a heretical idea to an extent, of course. But you can see this connection with Levinas also if you read him more about this, of course, also because of his personal story, this embracing of the thing that happens to one, and it's a very, despite invoking religiosity a lot, it's a very grounded philosophy that he's trying to mount, the one that does not evade suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think that is like one of the clearest, really, one of the clearest threads that can be seen, was inspired maybe by extensive reading of Dostoevsky, but Awee actually mentions another thread that is way more explicit, because it's something that Levinas, I think in like a later interview, said specifically and very explicitly. Awee talks about how Levinas is concerned with one's responsibility beyond intention. And there is a quote from Brothers Karamazov where I believe Alyosha, the youngest Karamazov brother, says, "I am guilty in front of everyone. Oh no, everyone is guilty for everyone, and I most of all." Is an approximate, I think, translation there. And that was an explicit motto of Levinas, as stated pretty explicitly. And that is, so this talk about responsibility, you can really see, and in that sense, if you like doing a bit of history with philosophy, a bit of, try to historically consider it, it's very interesting to see how, even though he was a Jewish philosopher, how orthodoxy has influenced him, how, this accursed part of the world that he came out of influenced him, despite him being completely culturally French for the most part of his life. But this is all to say that there's really a lot there. And I think that if you start reading Levinas and you're thinking, oh, it's very difficult, because I think it is very difficult. He writes it in a bit of an almost associative poetry thing, but there is actually something very concrete there. So it's can be difficult to sift through it. Very beautiful and very poetic, but difficult. So if you open Levinas and you're like, okay, maybe I'm not ready yet, open a Dostoevsky.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When we talk about the scale of the biblical decision of Job to keep believing, to not lose faith, would you tie that together with the difference in either respecting or murdering the other? Being put to that sometimes almost impossible and very difficult choice to keep respecting the other. Like Awee has just mentioned this. That when confronted with the other, you can choose between murder and respect. Because it is such a fundamental and also such a difficult thing to grasp. So I'm thinking maybe there's a parallel to be drawn, but I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think specifically with the story of Job, at least this part of it, because I think we decided to explicitly discuss it later also, unless I'm mistaken, that the other is not God. So you cannot, Job's relationship to the higher being, God, not the same as the other. The other is bigger than me, but not God. And I do think we will talk about it more later.
Okay.
Yeah. And for now?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to take in. To close off the episode, Awee is going to give an example in which the face of the other appears. And we're going to end on a low note.
Yeah.
There's no other way to put it. But I think it's an important one, so stick with it.
I agree.
I'll give you an anecdote. This truly happened, but it's not very tragic, but it may make you understand what we're talking about, what Levinas is talking about. One of the first classes I gave on Levinas, I was struggling with this whole philosophy, really struggling with it, especially with this image of the other as third. And right that time there was on television footage from a catastrophe in Colombia. Due to deforestation, a massive mudslide came down the mountain and crushed villages and everybody living in it. And there apparently was a young girl and her aunt, we only knew that later, who fled the village together from the mud. Here they are, fleeing, and they got tired, and the mud came to them, and it was climbing up to their chins, and the aunt of the little girl got exhausted and she died. So the little girl had to step on the body of her aunt to keep above the mud. And then, of course, long before the people who aid you came, there were journalists. And the journalist took a picture of this little girl. And this little footage as a film was also shown on the news. This little picture. I still have it framed in my house. A terrible, terrible event. At home, of course, I imagine, people watched the news, felt pity. You would feel pity. This little girl with her little face above the mud, looking at you. It's not really Levinas because she is a specific face, but just to, I hope you will understand, because I'm trying to tell you the crucial thought that is what that Levinas is talking about. So you feel pity, you feel sympathy even. Many people would have talked with each other and said, we got to help. A wife tells her husband, we're going to send money. We're not going to buy that BMW that you want. You look like a pimp in it anyway, so we're not going to buy the pimp, but we'll buy the BMW, the pimp car. We'll just drive the Fiat Fiasco for another couple of years, and we'll send the money to Colombia. People felt sorry. People felt addressed. People felt, and here's the point. Here's the point. What happens with the face of the other? Do you feel called upon, or are you called upon? That is the crucial difference. Do you feel called upon? So then the other is still part of your throne project, your being in the world. Or is this a truly shocking experience, beyond my caring being in the world, beyond myself as a throne project, beyond my benevolence, beyond my commitment? I am called upon. Ik word aangesproken by the face of the other. Period. Levinas calls this difficult freedom. And he corrects Sartre. He says, we're not condemned to be free. We are chosen to be free. Because we can have this shocking experience that has never been voiced in the entire history of Western philosophy and Western culture. That you are called upon by the face, which is an abyssal, vulnerable face of the other. Period. Difficult freedom. Difficile liberté.